Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to today's seminar on developing resilience to climate change and achieving food security in West Africa, follow-up action from the UN Food Systems Summit. Today's seminar is co-organized by IFPRI and the West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use. I'm Katarla Taylor, Events Manager at IFPRI, and I will moderate today's session. Thank you for those of you who are joining us live and to those of you who will watch this recording. To participate in our Q&A session that will follow the presenters' remarks, please submit your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on Twitter. Today's collaborative seminar will address issues, constraints, and challenges to developing resilience to climate change and achieving food security in West Africa. Panelists will discuss specific action plans that will be needed for following up on recommendations from the 2021 United Nations Food Systems Summit. Let me now call on Tunis van Reenen, Director of Business Development and External Relations at IFPRI, to provide opening remarks. Tunis, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katala. I would like to give a very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to participate in this very important event. Secondly, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this webinar. I know how much effort goes on behind the scenes to make events like this happen, so a very big thank you for that. Today's webinar is the second in a series of online events that IFPRI and WASCAL have jointly organized to bring together experts to discuss climate change, food systems transformation, and resilience in West Africa. As mentioned by Katala, today's event comes on the heels of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. This summit saw tremendous mobilization in the months and weeks leading up to the event on September 23. The summit was intended to push the international community to take swift action towards transforming global food systems, to ensure food security, and to address biodiversity and climate change. The summit actually came at a very, very critical time. Global hunger and malnutrition are back on the rise again after decades of decline. Last year, the COVID-19 pandemic increased the number of people living in poverty by up to 124 million people. And it is projected that around 600 million people will be living in poverty by 2030. Clearly, and unfortunately, the world is off course to achieve almost all of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, not on track. The United Nations Food Systems Summit helped to bring urgency around the need for local, national, regional, and international actors to come together to push for greater and more coordinated action to deliver the United Nations SDGs by transforming food systems. Worldwide, the agricultural sector accounts for almost 1/3 of all global greenhouse emissions. At the same time, the agriculture sector is highly impacted by climate change, with women and the most vulnerable paying the highest price. Agriculture, therefore, will play a huge role in shaping the transformation we need to achieve food security, develop resilience to climate change, and protect the environment. As a result of the UNFSS and all the lead up to this event, more than 150 countries committed to transform their food systems while championing greater participation and equity among farmers, women, youth, and indigenous people groups. Now, it is especially important to note that West Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world for food insecurity and climate change. National policies need to reflect the need for making food systems resilient to climate change shocks. Policies focusing on food systems transformation will require research on how the climate change shocks affect food security, nutrition, and health outcomes, will require information on how the transformation could be made inclusive for men, women, and youth. And be mindful of the fact that resilience building also requires capacity building and partnerships at all levels. This is so critical. Our event today will look more specifically at climate change, gender, resilience issues that have emerged from the UNFSS. Presenters will then narrow these discussions to focus more on climate change and resilience research and on-the-ground implementation. It's a real pleasure to join hands with WASCAL again for this event, and I look forward to a very lively and informative webinar that will move us forward and in our thinking and actions in achieving greater food security in West Africa. Madam Moderator, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tunis, for those remarks. Our next speaker is Mumini Savadogo, who is the Executive Secretary at the West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, who will also now give us opening remarks. Over to you, Mumini. Mumini, you're muted.
Hello, hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So it's my pleasure to join my voice to the one of my dear friend and partner, Tunis van Renen, to welcome all of you who are joining us today, and to also send my appreciations to all our joint effort towards organizing effectively these seminars. Indeed, the topic we are discussing today is of great importance. And I would like to appreciate all the key speakers that will take us through this topic, developing resilience to climate change and achieving food security in West Africa, follow-up action from the UN Food System Summit. Yes, climate change and food systems are very interlinked, as we all know, and we need really resilient food systems. Let us just to emphasize on some of the aspects that have been highlighted by Tunis. Let us consider some evidences. For instance, from the special report of the IPCC on climate change and land, it appears that 23% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions from 2007 to 16 derive from agriculture, forestry, and other land use. This, of course, is due to the expansion of land area required to meet the increasing demand for food and nutrition as the population keeps increasingly growing and rapidly. This also speaks to the land use change, land use intensification, and climate change, which have contributed to desertification and land degradation. Of course, all these informations guide us to a kind of pessimistic view, but I want us to look at the key challenge before us, is that West Africa has a young population, agroecological and climate smart systems, nature-based solutions that exist already, and we must together join effort to promote and innovate them so that we can reverse the negative trends and devise sustainable food systems. I know we can accelerate the transformations towards resilient and sustainable farming and food systems if we undertake a kind of integrated approach. And the summit has highlighted very clearly the need to acknowledge and value the diversity of our farming and food systems, the need for finance and continuous capacity building. In that regard, we offer an excellent platform of 12 graduate schools, 16 training programs, and a competence center in climate research and services provisions. And partners are all invited to join us in preparing excellent scientists and experts in the climate change and land use nexus. We need to develop international, regional, and local alliances in contributing to enhance governance with effective science policy interface. And that's where we laud our partnership with IFPRI, and we believe that together, striving with that idea, we continue to develop further and share knowledge and ideas towards developing effective science policy interface that will guide good governance for food transformation to meet the food and nutrition demands of our increasing population. We believe that through this webinar, we learn a lot through our speakers, and I wish all of us a very fruitful seminar. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you for those remarks, Mumini. I'm sure IFPRI looks forward to continuing this effective partnership with WASCAL. Our first speaker is John Ulumwengu, who's a Senior Research Fellow and Africa-wide Coordinator of the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program and the Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support System platform. John will share on a measurement approach for a resilience index, possible applications to climate shocks. John, over to you.
Thank you, Katala, and thank you to the organizers for this opportunity. As Katala said, I was asked to share a brief on how to measure resilience index capacity and an application to climate shock. Before doing that, I would like to give an overview of where African countries stand when it comes to enhancing resilience to climate variability. For those who are familiar with the CADEP framework and its Malabo declaration, there are 7 commitments that the head of state pledged to achieve by 2025. And one of those commitments is the commitment number 6 on enhancing resilience to climate variability. As the map shows, for 2019, only 11 countries were on track compared to the benchmark. 7 were on track in 2017. I have the result for 2021, but I cannot release it because I'm not allowed to. But the picture is that it's a gleam, and there is a lot of work, investment, effort to be done. And of course, if you cannot measure it, you cannot track it, you cannot achieve it. That's how it goes. The first layer when on the measurement of resilience is really to define clearly the theory of change of either the project or the program or whatever initiative. Why? Because the theory of change will link the interventions, activities, investment to the expected outcome. Here, I'm sharing the one from the World Bank, the funded West Africa Food System Resilience Program. And as you can see on your right, you have the food system resilience in West Africa. And the yellow box is that resilience capacity that we need to measure to link it to the food system. But then comes a stream of you have intermediate outcomes all the way to activities that one will have to invest on to build that capacity, to build that resilience capacity. So the focus here will be on that yellow. How do you measure that yellow box? Let me go back to it. As you see, of course, the climate specific component is right in the middle, but the focus is on not only on the climate. Why? Because you need to build a comprehensive measurement framework, which has the climate component, but also other component on trade, component on information, component on the capacity to design the program. So overall, you need, of course, a set of a good set of data to do that. Resilience by design is a dynamic concept, which means you need to take into account time. So how do you design that data set? First, you need a initial state, food security information, health information, assets, social capital, access to services like education, infrastructure, ecological services as well. So we need some sort of a baseline that we would use in the process of measuring, assessing the resilience capacity. And of course, you need to differentiate between covariate shocks and idiosyncratic shocks. Again, even if the focus is on climate here, drought and flood, but we need to make sure that we capture the other shocks. COVID-19, for example, is not climate-related shock, but if you look at the impact on food security, it's very important that in whatever resilience system framework that you're developing, you take into account those information as well. Empirically, there are many other frameworks, but the one that FAO has developed, the so-called resilience index measurement analysis, is, as of now, the most comprehensive. Remember my reference to the theory of change. So this RIMA replicates the theory of change. That's how it's important to start to well define what is the theory of change of the resilience program, the resilience initiative, resilience project, because your resilience measurement will have to replicate that theory of change. That's very, very important. This is one application for South Sudan. With a colleague from FAO, this has been applied to many countries. This is just one example, but I wanted to point out here that it's the design, of course, depends on each context, in each community, each country, because the pillar, so to speak, are not the same. And in this case here, for example, in South Sudan, we had to include conflict and local governance, which were key variables in the context of South Sudan. That's that. So yeah, and then once you have designed, developed that framework, you can do now all the simulation that you want to. It can be on climate shock, like here we simulated livestock disease, loss of livestock because of some climate issues. You can simulate drought, you can simulate flood, and see how that affects the resilience capacity and ultimately food and nutrition security. One of the points that I wanted to end with is the system resilience versus component resilience, which are different things, because what I described is more component resilience at household level, at community level. But if we learn anything from the UN food system, is that yes, indeed, it is a system, which means it includes several components that are interlinked. And to measure resilience of a system, you need to take into account that network kind of behavior of the system, because some will be more important, some component more important than the others. So we need to so that's the next frontier, so to speak, into this resilience measurement that some of us are working on how to, in addition to the component resilience, how to capture system resilience that to replicate this UN food system approach. Now, in concluding here, first, as I said, it's very important to align your project theory of change to data collection tools and, of course, intervention cost. It's very important. Often, the measurement of resilience, it's often like an afterthought. At the end of the project, finally, we decide to go and measure the resilience. No, it has to be embedded in the project alongside the theory of change. We need to develop a good data system tracking and record cost to data for intervention needs to become a standard part of program implementation. Again, it's not after the program that we have to go back to collect information to measure resilience. It has to be part of and then if possible, I know it's costly, it's good to have a panel data set, at least a component of household that you follow throughout the project lifetime, because then you can assess how resilient those households were and what are the factors that determine the resilience, and then change eventually as you go. I will stop here and wait for questions. Thank you, Katala.
Thank you very much, John, for those remarks, highlighting the importance of evidence-based resilience strategies and that building resilient food systems won't happen without a consistent investment to collect data. Our next speaker is Kinde Ogunjobi, a meteorologist, environmental and climate scientist who currently serves as the Director of Research at the West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, where his research focuses on air quality modeling and climate modeling, amongst other activities. He will share on translating resilience strategies at the landscape and farm levels. Over to you, Kinde.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. Okay. Please, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see it. You can put it on full screen.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much, Katala, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you also to WASCAL Management and IFPRI for organizing this webinar. This afternoon, I will be speaking on developing resilience strategy to climate change at the landscape and farm levels in West Africa. My presentation is as a result of different research work at the WASCAL Competence Center, which we have done, and other contributions are so stated by Dr. Safi, Seni, Musa, etc., which I'm presenting today to this meeting. So the first thing I'm going to look at in my presentation is to look at the current climate situation and the projected climate situation over the region. And we have done this by simulating temperature over a baseline from 1981 to 2010, and using the SSP scenario of 1.26 and 3.70 also to simulate temperature over Sahel region and the Guinea zone, as shown in my presentation. We observed regional warming outpacing the global average of about plus 0.8 degrees Celsius to 1.2 degrees Celsius over the period of analysis. We also observe an amplified warming, towards the end of the 21st century. This was also done on the rainfall pattern over the region, as indicated in this slide. And also we observe recovery with much variable average rainfall regime in the Sudano-Sahelian region of our zone, of our region, and also projected slight increase of average annual rainfall over the Sudano-Sahelian region of West Africa, and a quasi-stationary observation over the southern region of zone of the region. However, we also observed a kind of a stationary amplitude as seen here towards the end of the 21st century using the SSP 126 and 3.70 scenario. Here we also look at the model result using statistical pattern, to also look at what we are having under the two different scenarios. Central southern zone and the northwest zone is observed to be stationary, while the center and the northeast is more humid. This we have observed also a drier west as indicated in the slide under the SSP 3.70 regime from 2031 to 2060, and we have also projected it up to 2000. Now, going further to see the impact of weather and climate extremes on the region, we observe using the SSP 1.26 within the Sudan, Guinea, and over West Africa, there has been a tremendous increase as indicated in the table above. So we observe that there are heavy rains events which are coming up within the region. Heat waves is persisting, and there is a mixed drought and flood while we're having single rainy season location in the region. So these are just some of the climatic effect that we have seen. We also try to see this impact on the stream flow of major river basins, in the region. And this we have done with this slide, and we are taking a very simple one using the Volta Basin. And what was observed, as shown here, is that there have been a zonal contrast between the west and the eastern zone. The west is getting dry, while the eastern zone of the Sudano-Sahelian region is, getting pronounced wetness. So these are just the climatic effect. But we now realize that all this climatic effect has what we call effect on the food chain over the region. For example, extreme rainfall events, of course, will lead to increased risk in food security, extended drought or flooding, of course, which will lead to drop in the yield of our cropping, as we are going to see later. So we have a kind of food chain from our production to consumption to transformation to commercialization. The effect of climate in the region, does not leave the region alone. So here we also try to simulate the cropping land productivity based on the different climate scenario that I have shown you earlier. And we discovered that 40 to 60% of the production area may not be suitable for the same crop over a period of time, as indicated in the plots we are having here. This could be as a result of full degradation of land use, land cover, as being said earlier, as a result of erosion, eroded land surface, leaching of nutrients in our soil, flooding, and also we have been losing settlement due to increased population in the region. Now, we now did this in order to quantify the yield changes of different crops under rain-fed and irrigated regime and in different warming that we have observed in our scenario. And in this slide, you will see that the crops that are in yellow fonts are showing decrease over a period of time, as shown in the last column on the slide, from 2031 to 2060 as projected. It's quite interesting that cassava, soybean, and cotton is showing an increase. And this could be as a result of a special attention that is placed on this product, especially cotton in the region, as we know that cotton in some of the Sudano-Sahelian countries of Burkina, Mali, cotton plays a very important economic crop for their region. So for the zone. So we now realize that, of course, even if it's increasing in our climate stresses, cotton, cassava, soybean is showing an increase in the average yield plot over the time that we have projected. We also did this also for cocoa, cashew, and shea nut, and also observe that production is also decreasing as we go deep into the century. Now, we did not limit this only to crops. We also looked into livestock, as we know that livestock is also a major source of income for us. And we looked at the effect of water availability, in this region. Excuse me. Okay, so of course we know now that there's been a shift or increase in the transhumance movement of our crop due to increasing competition over natural resources of land, water, and conflicts within the region. So this has also impacted a lot of stress on livestock production, in our region. Now, we try to also look at the adaptation strategy, minding the title, the focus of our discussion this afternoon or this morning, as the case may be. Different customized adaptation strategic water management techniques have been adapted over the region, especially in the Sudano-Sahelian region of West Africa. And we have also, involved in customized climate services, as you have seen here. And WASCAL is playing a very prominent role in the development of tailored climate services, which we are passing on to the farmers and also to end users. As you have seen here, local contents of climate stresses and information is passed in order to increase, adaptation and resilience need, in our region. Of course, off-grid solar panel system also in Niger and in Mali, of course, in Burkina Faso, we have also been doing a little of adaptation and resilience need in order to improve food security, within our region. But we have often observed some constraints, and these constraints involve fund constraints. And I think WASCAL and IFPRI will be doing very much in order to seek for funds, in order, to see how to ameliorate all these problems of climate stresses on food production and food security in the region. Knowledge gap is also identified, but thanks to WASCAL, has been highlighted by the executive director of WASCAL, that now WASCAL has 12 graduate study program cut across the region where we are training capacity in order to see how to use the knowledge of climate change and bridge the gap of food security within the region. Terrorist attack, political instability, migration is another major issue. Gender inequality is also a major constraint. And as seen in this slide, we say there is no one panacea or one solution that is cast in stone to resolve this problem. So policies are still all too often designed without proper consultation, especially in the area of climate service provision. Now, poverty traps is also, I'm going to consider here cases of a kind of a vicious circle amongst our farmers. So the main obstacle for food security here is, of course, lack of investment, low income, availability or accessibility, low yield of our food crops, and then low labor productivity. And we know that there are yield gaps which remain enhanced by climate change and climate vulnerability over the region. So of course, it makes the poor getting poor. And then, now we want to see which of these adaptation options are we considering. So we consider various adaptation strategies, which is cataloged in this slide. Things like stone beds, design, mulching, irrigation system, etc., etc. This is now, we now did this and did it on a small scale or a medium scale, and then perform what we call the SWOT analysis in order to know which adaptation options is most suitable in order to reduce the stresses of climate, on food production within the region. And this we have done here. And you have seen here now that For example, under crop production, the ZI method is seen to be more effective for water management. Rain harvest is seen to be more effective. We also carry this out also for the coastal, region, coastal zone of our region. Now, the point now is that at what cost are we, is this effect of climate change on food production in our region? And this, we have done monetary valuation of operational implementation costs for sustainable adaptation method. And this, you have seen in this slide. For example, for ZI, for the production of cereals like millet, sorghum, maize, yam, we need about $168.50 US per hectare. And then we can upscale this on a regional level to know how much is your monetary valuation when it comes to operating and implementation of a sustainable adaptation policy. This we have done also for water resources and then also for the coastal zone. The same goes also for livestock, which we have done, which we are seeing in this slide. And also, we now say that there is need also to improve on the weather readiness of our nation within the region. And this, we took Mali and Niger as a case study. So there needs to be an investment cost for capacity building of our national institutions, such as the Hydrometeorological Institution, the Civil Protection and Disaster Risk Management Services of our region. Like I said, we took a case of Mali and Niger for the year 2019 to 2029 serving as baseline. And we realized that a total estimated cost of over $6 million US is needed in order to upscale or upgrade weather readiness of our nation, to combat, these climate stresses. In Niger, we quantify that to be around $3.3 million US. This we have given to ECOWAS. We did this, we conducted this on behalf of the World Bank, and we sent the result to ECOWAS in order to see how to upscale and upgrade facilities in the hydrometeorological agencies of this country. Now, in summary, what we have done here is that we have seen changes in trends and variability of the regional climate, including high frequency and intensity, duration and timing of extreme weather events. We have done actual investigation of the impact, showing the consequences of climate change on agricultural food system and food security in West Africa. The initial investment cost is observed to be higher at the initial stage of operation, but they become low over a longer period of time. Now, what are the way forward? Number one, operationalization and quick uptake of structural adaptation option is very important. We need to get involved in co-designing and co-implementation at different levels of all the ideas we are bringing up, issues of climate change, service delivery, adaptation methods, and all mitigation methods that we are talking about needs to be co-designed with stakeholders and end users. And we need to improve on our capacity building, which I said, of course, WASCAL is also taking a lead on. Gender equality, integrated transboundary, and is also to be looked into. Insurance scheme is also a major factor that needs to be considered. Research and innovation in adaptation science to support optimization is also very germane. Operationalization must also involve sovereign wealth funding, private sector, complemented by Global Fund. And I think WASCAL and IFPRI will be looking deep into this in making sure that we also have access to Global Fund in also mitigating all these effects. This is where I'm going to stop. Open to comments and questions at a later time. Thank you, Katala. Back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kinde, for those remarks and emphasizing the importance of designing policies that properly consider the realities in local communities and outlining first the steps needed for operational adaptation. A reminder that we will be coming to the Q&A session soon following the presenters' remarks. So please go ahead and submit your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag #AskIFPRI on Twitter. Our final speaker is Ifoma Kenneth Anugwa, a lecturer and gender specialist in the Department of Agricultural Extension at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, and she has been involved in gender-based research in collaboration with IFPRI. Ifoma, over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Cutler. I'll be making a presentation, a very brief presentation on climate change, gender, and resilience issues arising from the 2021 United Nations Food Summit. I'll take some excerpts from a Nigeria case study. Yeah, so I would like to discuss key highlights from the 2021 UN Food System Summit as it concerns my discussion today. So the UN Food System Summit, among other things, focuses on food system resilience in the face of increasing climate change and gender inequalities. The key thing is that food system, the key message, one of the key messages is the need for the transformation of the food system to be more resilient to extreme weather conditions and other stressors like food insecurity that has been induced by climate change. One important aspect that cannot be overlooked is the role of women as important actors and contributors to the food system. The reason is because they are the key to household food security. And so their contribution to food system transformation does not need to be underestimated or even overlooked. And so based on this, particular emphasis was made on addressing gender inequalities and power imbalances that will undermine the ability of women to contribute to food system resilience by delivering sustainable and equitable livelihood. So let's take a look at the context. Climate change, as it has been discussed severally by previous speakers, has heightened
Seems as though we've lost Ifoma for a moment. Let's give her a moment to come back in. Ifoma, are you able to hear us? Okay, it looks as though we've lost Ifoma for the moment. So what we are going to do is go ahead and jump into the next portion of our program. And once she is reconnected, we will give her an opportunity to complete her presentation. As she was the final speaker, we now have an opportunity to engage with our live audience, and all of our presenters will respond to as many of your questions as time permits. We would like to hear from as many of you as we can, so please be brief with your questions when you type them in the chat box. I will read one question at a time and the relevant speaker will respond. In some instances, we will consolidate your questions because of time. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first question that we have coming in, I will direct to you, John. And that question is, what are the key challenges in measuring resilience for food security? It seems as though we also do not have John. So let me move over to you, Kinde. Can you go ahead and share with us how you quantify the monetary valuation of operational implementation costs of sustainable adaptation strategies at the country level?
Okay, thank you very much, Katala, and thanks to the participant that had that question. Yeah, so what we did in my presentation, you'll see that what we did was to estimate it in terms of monetary value of US dollar per hectare. So if you want to now upscale it at a country level, what we need to do is to measure the size of your farmland, or you measure the size of your grazing area, and then quantify it according to the projection that we have made per hectare. So that's what we have. And then you can have it, over a larger land domain, which you really want to do either at the local level or at the sub-national level. So that's just to quickly answer that question. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kinde. The next question, it's a big picture question, and Kinde, perhaps you want to jump in on this, and anyone else, please feel free to as well. The question is coming from Emmanuel Matsabo from the Solidaridad Network in Kenya, and he's asking, what is the role of agroecology and agrobiodiversity in achieving sustainable food systems in developing countries throughout Africa? Kinde, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well,
a big question.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question, and I think agriculturists in the region also can, partake in extension services delivery, which I've earlier mentioned, and I also mentioned the issue of development of climate and environmental services, which I think our agricultural professionals can also use and take this to the farmers in order to ameliorate and reduce the effect of climate stresses on the crop yield within the region. So we can have it in different forms in terms of capacity building and also extension services, like I said, which also can, like we said, collaborating with scientists and institutions like WASCAL and IFPRI within the region, so that we can get all these policies and then take it to farmers on the farm on how to implement all these science-based services that are developed by our scientists. So I think they do have a very critical role to play in those two areas. Thank you. Back to you, Katala.
Thank you, Kinde. Does anyone else care to comment on that? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes,
please do.
Yes. One may want to look also at the importance of the ecosystem services to food and nutrition security. And this is very, very important. If you look at the aquatic ecosystems or other ecosystems, biodiversity is contributing a lot to the different categories of ecosystem services. In our nations, for example, non-timber products, are playing vital role in nutrition and food in complementing our crop production. That's why we need to develop further nature-based solutions, taking into account those ecosystem services and embedding them into the full system analysis of our food systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mumini. Another question for perhaps Suresh and Professor Kone want to jump in on this. It's a big picture question about, and it's coming from Olowo S, who is a field operations supervisor at Laterite in Uganda. His question is, given that one of the primary drivers of food insecurity is population growth and improper land use patterns, is there a grand plan or initiative to help avert these current food security issues that Africa as a continent is facing? Suresh, Professor Kone, do you care to jump in?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. It's really a big picture question from Olowo, who's saying that given that one of the primary drivers of food insecurity is population growth and improper land use patterns, for Africa as a whole, what are some initiatives or current plans to help avert these issues for the continent as a whole? And I suppose John would be able to come in, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I want just to come back to on agroecological aspect, saying that Yes, agroecologic is yes, a use of best practices to reduce the use of synthetic pesticide, or use of best practices for soil management. I think is very important that those aspects can improve production and also can help for food security. And also agrobiodiversity, where we are using different kind of crops and taking into account the ecosystem services also can be very useful. In addition to what he said, I think we cannot say that population growth in Africa, in despite of the number of people we have, we cannot say that the population growth can be a constraint for food security.
Great, thank you very much. Suresh, did you care to comment on the earlier question?
I would like to think through on the broader side. You know, we talked about the UN Food System Summit just 10 days ago, and we are also translating the call for action from UN Food System Summit at the not only at the continental level but also at the regional level. So this dialogue that we are having is specifically to look at the West African context. So in this context, we need to think about how policies can be or strategies can be designed with the knowledge evidence base that Professor Kinde talked about, and also how do we build the capacity of the national research systems to translate the knowledge into action on the ground. The research system, education system, and the extension system need to work together in order to translate knowledge on the ground. But I also would like to ask John, if he's online, to come in and talk a little bit about the African Union approach, probably CADAP approach, and he is involved in those aspects of the broader continental efforts. John, are you around?
It seems as though John is still disconnected, but we do have IFPRI back with us. So I would like to now turn it back over to her to finish her presentation. IFPRI, if you would like to proceed, the floor is yours.
Yeah, we'll come back to.
IFPRI, can you hear us? Are you ready to proceed?
Mic is muted.
Yes, she's still.
Open the mic.
She still needs to pull up a presentation. There we go.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, so I have muted. I've unmuted. Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, if
yes,
we can hear you. Yes. You can please proceed.
Okay,
yes.
So we'll take a very quick look at the climate change scenario in West Africa, as has been discussed by Professor Kinde.
Okay, it looks like we have lost IFPRI again. It seems
okay. I just want to respond to a question raised on. Can I go?
Please feel free to go ahead and provide your response.
Okay. Yes, I just want to come back to the agroecological aspect where I was talking about the use of strategic, the best practices to reduce the use of pesticide, chemical pesticide, and also the best practices that can help to have the good soil management. If you have those things together, I think transferring those solutions to farmers can help to enhance the production. Talking about the population of Africa, I think, and also the production, I think the population is not too much to say that we have, we link the population and the management of the soil. One is to see how best we can manage our production using the best practices in terms of land management, land use and land management, to develop a very useful system where we can transfer those solutions to our communities in order to take into account also the ecosystem services, where we can, in addition to all of those practices, we can have a best solution for land management, land use, and also to produce a lot of, to diversify our production. Taking into account those aspects, we can also feed the population in Africa. I want to say that there is a lot of initiative in Africa side, in West Africa, in Eastern Africa, where people are developing solutions in order to tackle these issues of production and also the productivity of our crop. This is a kind of a main of technology, making technology available for the end users to enhance the production. This is my talk on this aspect, linked to the production, linking the production in a population growth in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kone. I see that John Ulimwengu has been able to reconnect. So John, let me go ahead and put a couple questions to you. One of the questions coming in is, it's a big picture one on, given that one of the primary drivers of food insecurity is population growth and improper land use patterns, what are some of the initiatives that Africa as a continent can enact to help address these challenges? Can you comment on that, please, John?
Yes, thank you, Katala. For those who are familiar with the CADEP framework, there are and Malabo commitment in 2014. There are 7 commitments or 7 goals that African leaders have pledged to achieve by 2025, and in those commitments, there is one on land use management. I mentioned the one on resilience. So yes, there are 47, so to speak, policy instruments that African leaders have been implemented since 2000. The Malabo Commitment Declaration 2014 that includes those issues, and the work that African Union Commission, including RESAX and IFPRI, are doing is to support countries not only to learn from what they have achieved so far, and that's the reason for the biennial review process. We released the first report in 2017, the second 2019. The third report is being reviewed now. We have the results that we cannot share, unfortunately. But the whole idea is, again, since this is it's a joint program, they made sure that there is a mutual accountability framework that allows countries to learn from the progress. Not all the countries are on track in several of those commitments and those actions, but it's quite promising for the first time as far as Africa is concerned. As far as agriculture sector is concerned, there is a system of tracking progress and learning from it as they proceed.
Thank you, John. A question coming in from Alexandra Akakar of Nigeria. She's asking, how can the federal government be more involved in incentivizing people to take up studies in agroecology and agrodiversity? Professor Kone, perhaps you want to come in on that? How can the federal government be more involved in incentivizing people to take up studies in agroecology and agrobiodiversity?
Okay, thank you so much for this relevant question. Is the diversity, diversify our agriculture is key. First, to diversify the production and to make available along the season food to our communities. This is very important in terms of diversification. It can also help to have a lot of crops and coming to the government is very important, because when we are developing technologies, those decision makers are very important to take decision based on the result you have. Because if you develop any technology, making available, making attesting that this kind of food production is very important to solve this issue, this particular issue, developing a policy can help the government to take a decision in order to implement the technology for the technology implementation. This is where we need also in collaborative way with our government to discuss, because we take a decision to implement the proposal based on our technology. We need also to develop the policy. That policy can go through the government part and also to the end users, and the government can help involving the government, sharing with the government side. By developing a policy, I think we can bring them to take the right decision to help the implementation of each technology. This is what I want to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A question for you, Kinde. It's coming from Mohammed, who is based in Bangladesh. He's saying, we all know that developing countries are really playing a critical role in climate change calamities. They're not responsible for most of what we're currently experiencing. So what are some strategies that developed countries have taken in terms of agricultural development toward helping developing countries fight climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much, Katala, again. I think, of course, if I get the questions very right, West Africa, our region, for example, and Africa indeed is one of the lowest emitter of greenhouse gases that have been causing so much damage and having very great effect on climate change in our region. Can I go ahead? I think.
Yes, please go ahead.
If Yoma is coming
yes.
on. Okay, all right. Okay, so you, of course, despite that, I want to quickly say that, of course, developed countries need to actually partner with developing countries and low-income countries in order to facilitate policies and programs within the low-income countries and developing countries in how to reduce their carbon footprint. This is really very, very, very important. And I think one of the initiatives, we have several initiatives, and I'm so happy that this platform is as a result of the outcome of the result from a global UNFCCC program. So I believe that the developed countries and the developing countries should work together in order to support policies and programs that can reduce our carbon footprint within the region. This is really very important. That's number one. Then, the next one I want to quickly talk about is in the area of research and innovation. Developing countries need to also kind of assist in developing capacity in terms of research and innovation within the growing economy, within the low-income economy. This is also very, very important. I think Professor Kone also mentioned the issue of capacity building. And this is really very good that developing countries also should see ways of building capacity in the area of climate change within our region. So these three aspects is really very important in order to seek that support from developed countries in assisting low-income countries in reducing their carbon footprint and reducing the impact of climate change on their livelihood. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kinde. I see that Ifoma is back with us. So Ifoma, let me ask you, how can the capacities of women be strengthened to enable them to build resilience against climate change?
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. Sorry, I had to go, I went out again. But basically, the rights of women to participate in all levels of decision-making, including the design of adaptation actions, needs to be recognized. In that way, their capacity to contribute to be resilient against climate change will be it will help to improve their capacity to be resilient against the adverse effects of climate change. Also, it's very important for women to have adequate access to land, credit, and information. Because when they do that, relevant climate change information, because when they do that, it will help to support their productive and marketing activities. Finally, it's important to improve the adaptive capacity of women. They need to have access to adequate education and other knowledge generating systems. In that way, or in this way, they will contribute sustainably to climate change adaptation. And that will also help to build their resilience because, of course, there are unequal opportunities between women and men. And recall that I said initially that women are the key to household food security, but then gender inequality and power symmetry, as evident in the study I conducted, that was conducted in Nigeria, have resulted to women being less resilient than men. But if the adaptive capacities of women build their resilience or bounce back after exposure to climatic shocks or climate change-induced food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ifoma. John, back to you. How would you assess the resilience of African food systems in the face of COVID-19?
Yeah, that's it is. The short answer is very weak. I say that we have last week we had a meeting in Nairobi to conclude the 2021 cadet binary review report, and the result that we have that we know show that many African countries were not resilient at all. The food system that was built was not resilient, and at many level. First, the COVID-19 has impacted access to inputs across the continent. Inputs like seed, like fertilizer. Second, the production level as well, because of the social distancing measures. Many farmers could not even reach the fields, could not access the field. So in terms of both harvest and the planting seasons, there were a lot of losses. And then you move to access to the market. Again, because of the shutdowns across the continent. So at every stage of the food system, we notice a lot of failures, so to speak, with respect to resiliency. And the result overall is that very few countries have, I don't want to say it, but are not on track with respect to some of the Malabo commitment mostly because of the COVID-19. And that's why some of us are pushing for to revamp to redesign. I mentioned that there is one component commitment on resilience, and that commitment, I think it's very weak because some of the indicators of that commitment, like a budget line on disaster, that's not enough as a capacity to withstand the shocks such as COVID-19. So there are work to be done to improve the resilience of the overall system. And of course, it's different from country to country. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, John. Ifoma, coming back to you, your presentation highlighted some concerns around gender and the importance of integrating gender concerns in the design of climate change in order to accelerate the transformation of more sustainable, equitable, and resilient food systems in West Africa. So how can the extension system in African countries be changed to accommodate climate change and resilience building responses?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. You know, in West Africa, the extension system in West Africa is very weak. And Nigeria, taking Nigeria as a case study, the extension system is weak and ill-functional, basically due to a host of challenges, like weak linkages with relevant stakeholders, poor funding, poor and non-sustainable funding, and so on. So the extension system needs to be transformed to accommodate climate change resilience building measures. And how can this be done? This can be done by strengthening the linkages between the extension system and research and universities, research institutions and universities. It's also important to improve the technical capacity of extension agents to carry out climate change adaptation information, and also to disseminate relevant resilience building measures to farmers. So for extension agents to do that, their capacities need to be properly strengthened or built. Again, it's also important to establish and implement a dynamic, legislated, and functional national extension policy. In Nigeria, the national extension policy, which was established in 2017, is not yet functional. So it's important for this national extension policy to be fully implemented so as to enable the extension system to work adequately towards building the resilience of food system. And then finally, it's important to deploy a pluralistic, demand-driven, and participatory extension approach, which will enable extension agents to adequately carry out the extension services. And of course, there is need for a more sustainable form of funding to help fund extension services. And part of a more sustainable, a recommended sustainable funding of extension services would be cost sharing of the funds between extension agencies and farmers or other relevant stakeholders. And also there is need for a multilateral and funding from donor agencies. This will help to strengthen the extension system to adequately contribute to building the resilience of the food system.
Thank you, Ifoma. Coming to you, Kinde, your presentation touched on some of the costs involved. And so here's a question from Cedro Dannon. If you can clarify on how are African countries going to cover the mitigation and adaptation measures costs for ensuring climate resilience of the African food system? Great question.
Yes, great question. And I think I did mention it in my presentation. I see this as one way which that cost could be covered, and I would like other people to also join, is the involving in public-private partnership. I think this is really very important, and I did mention it as part of the constraints and the solution to those constraints of accessing funds. It's important that the private industry comes into the agricultural sector in order to reduce the impact of climate change on food security in our region. So this is really very important. And for example, I talked about issues of, and I think John also mentioned that in his presentation, if I had it very right, the issue of having climate indices or climate index, which could help in securing insurance and loans or funding for farmers in the region. This is really very important. So there should be an handshake between the public sector to drive our agricultural system, and also supported by government policies in order, to improve on having policies that could mitigate the effect of climate change on food security and food sustainability in our region. That's just the bit I want to add to that.
Thank you very much. John, let me come back to you. How does the Comprehensive Resilience Capacity Index compare with the Environmental Vulnerability Index? And what are the key challenges in measuring resilience for food security?
Yeah, let me just show you maybe a quick map that that gives you an idea of. So these two maps are from the CADEP BR database. The map on the left is the number of household resilience to climate shocks. The gray area are where we don't have the data. So that gives you the challenge that we have, and of course the green are the countries that are above the threshold. So that's the main challenge that we have now is the data. One. Second is the capacity to analytical capacity, and thanks to colleagues from FAO, we are working on setting up a hub, technical hub for resilience analysis for African countries. It's an ongoing between IFPRI and FAO. That's very important. Now, as I said, yes, the focus may be on climate-related shocks, but as we saw with COVID-19, COVID-19 is not a climate-related shocks, but still it has a huge impact across the whole food system. So that's where the idea of building a comprehensive resilience measurement framework that we can use to capture different type of shocks, maybe climate related, because if indeed the food system approach is the right thinking, then even in terms of shocks, we need to have that thinking as well, because the climate is more or less towards the production component of the food system. But you have shocks along the system, the market shocks, the price shocks, and even at the end, food safety shocks. Assume there is a break of some disease, aflatoxin, for example. It's not climate related, but if it happens, it's a shock that will reverberate across the whole system. So that's the idea of, in addition to focusing on climate vulnerability and so forth, we need a comprehensive framework that capture different type of shocks, which is, they are not mutually exclusive. We can have that comprehensive in addition to more specific on vulnerability to climate change.
Thank you very much, John. We are coming to the end of our program, and so I will now have to call on a couple of our organizers to provide us closing remarks. Let me begin with you, Suresh Babu, who is a Senior Research Fellow and Head of Capacity Strengthening at IFPRI. Over to you, Suresh.
Thank you, Katarla. I tried to share my screen. Can you see a screen?
Yes, we can. You just need to put it in presentation mode.
Oh, okay, let me do that. Okay. Just summarize quickly. It's very difficult to summarize this whole ideas that have come up from this. But then we started off with these emerging issues. We are connecting to Food System Summit that happened, United Nations Food System Summit that happened 10 days ago, to what can we do in West Africa region, and in not only in achieving food security, nutrition and health for all, but also how do we address the emerging issues of climate change and biodiversity. We talked extensively about COVID-19 and how this has pulled us back in terms of achieving SDGs, and also John talked about the CAADP goals. We are not on track in many countries, and how can we take action towards that. Taking action requires at the policy level, technological level, institutional capacity. We talked about the governance, data collection and service delivery. And then collectively, how do we build resilience of the system, food system as a whole, to face not just the COVID shock, but also a range of shocks that John talked about. Quickly, from that perspective, what are the actions needed? And John, of course, extended his presentation in terms of measuring, particularly how do we measure the resilience? It is important not just measure that at the end of the project. He talked about how do we start with resilience data. The data issue that he talked about doesn't exist, but we also talked about in the context of how we can strengthen the capacity for the measurement of the resilience. He talked about an initiative that he's working on with FAO and IFPRI, and we will also need to think about in terms of how do we connect the policy to the science and science policy interface in terms of translating that into action on the ground. And that's where John talked about the CAADP commitments and how the resilience is playing the role in terms of land use management and resilience goals. But he emphasized that it is not strong enough in the CAADP goals. And how do we build that, not just at the CAADP level, but also at the national level? How do we come up with the national resilience strategies that bring not just the disaster preparedness, in most of the cases is disaster preparedness, that we need to think along the value chain from the production to the consumers, right? And that's where the theory of change, that investments to outcomes context that John presented, becomes very useful. And he has given a broad perspective on how to measure as well as mainstream resilience goals in CAADP. And we need to take that up at the national level and also at the West Africa regional level. Moving to Professor Kahende's presentation, he talked about the landscape level. How do you translate the strategies at the landscape level? And he talked about the knowledge gaps, the gender inequality, which IFPRI expanded later on. And also, how do you generate policies with local consultations? His concern was, how do we address that policy issues, adaptation strategies, for example, the technology upscaling in local consultation with the local communities and partners. And that he talked about the professionalization. And that requires designing and implementation of this climate change resilience policies at different levels, right? And we also talked about diversification, public-private partnerships, and the role of insurance in terms of addressing the climate shock. So he brought that from the national level, regional level thinking to the landscape level. What are the constraints and challenges? Then moving on to IFPRI did not present, but then I had a chance to review her presentation earlier, so I'm just kind of summarizing, but she also talked about that in answering questions. She talked about the importance of addressing gender inequality. And that's a prime area, because in West Africa particularly, women play a major role in terms of producers, value adders, processors, marketers, and food preparation at home they do. IFPRI has been teaching me on this particularly, and they are also consumers of food. How do we address that inequality in the context of adaptive capacity? Adaptive capacity means you need to give access to land. She argued very well. You need to give access to knowledge and education for women. Without that, women cannot be built cannot be capacitated to adapt to climate shocks, as well as build the resilience required. Reaching out to research system which can gender mainstream the gender issues, and also education system where the capacity of the professionals can be improved in terms of addressing this issue. And extension systems she talked about as well, and investment in women's knowledge base. That's the argument she was making. But also Professor Monumi and Professor Kone talked about ecosystem services. I just want to add that bullet there. To remember that ecosystem services, agroecology, agrobiodiversity, they're all important for moving forward in terms of addressing these issues. So we addressed several broad issues, but also very specifically what is needed in West Africa context. So with that, let me reiterate that IFPRI and WASCAL are working together in order to address the policy issues on the one hand, the capacity challenges at the institutional level on the other hand, and also at the farm level, how do we translate the knowledge into action through research, extension, and education systems. Let me stop here, and we will continue to work together with WASCAL in a series of seminars to come, and we will be happy to have you back and then discuss and have a dialogue so that we can guide the policies and programmatic actions, the theory of change that John talked about, with the national systems and national governments. Thank you, Katarla.
Great. Thank you very much, Suresh, for that brilliant summary of our presenters' remarks and next steps. Let me now invite Professor Dauda Kone, who's Director of Capacity Strengthening at the West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use, to give us his concluding remarks. Over to you, Professor Kone.
Thank you so much, Katala, for this giving the floor. I want first to appreciate all the presenters for this very good presentation, very good talk. the very good question raised also by the people who are listening our presentation. I want to thank IFPRI at the high level and also WASCAL for this webinar, where we have seen that our presenter shows how resilience is very important for us in our continent, in West Africa. So taking that into account, and also the initiative in African Union side, the 4 pillars where we the also is one of those decisions who are tackling the issue of this climate change and also this food nutrition. We have seen that in addition to the resilience aspect, one aspect on prediction has been highlighted by our presenters also, in terms of taking into account the climate aspect in food production and also in livestock. This is not only food production, we are talking also in livestock, where we can have a better livestock to support the food production. It's also important that taking that into account, we have the system of when if we talk about our stakeholder, also the people who are doing the transfer knowledge to our communities. This is very important also, aspect that I highlighted by where those who are producing the food, those who are also managing the food transformation, and those who are taking the technology to transfer to the end users. And also, I think IFPRI and WASCAL can play a very good role on that. It's better to find a solution against malnutrition crisis we have in a situation where the food systems need to find a way to a solution for malnutrition crisis. Looking at also the incidence of our NDCs, this is very important, the NDCs to feed more population, more people in West Africa. It means that when we combat climate change is key for Africa, and we should take into account a multidisciplinary and also multi-partnership approaches to fight climate change in West Africa. This is where we are coming with a lot of partners. We are coming also with our scientists and WASCAL also, scientists and students and partners of WASCAL are working in a collaborative action. WASCAL has a response already, training people in a way of in different related climate issue to develop technologies and services. We need also that those service and technology we are developing WASCAL can reach or also can go to our decision maker and also our community through the development of policy. This is where we need IFPRI, we need also other partners to come and to develop the services developed by WASCAL scientists, WASCAL and students in collaborating with our supervisors who are working with WASCAL in the community of West Africa. It's better also those technology we are developing and taking, transforming in a policy brief or any policy using reach our community can be useful for the regions of community. We need to work in the same way. We need also to learn to see where now WASCAL have more than 200 students, more than 200 students who are working to develop technology with scientists. And among those 200 students selected, we have 150 students who are now collecting data in all the West African countries. Those students are developing technology to tackle the main issue of climate science. I think through our collaborative way, we have seen that we need institution. We have a key institution in the West African, in the African Union side. We have also a resource person. We have also people who can transfer knowledge. So all of the collaborative action can help us to go forward the Agenda 2030 Agenda of African Union. This is very important to take into account the climate-related issue. I want to thank all of you. I want to say WASCAL IFPRI need to find a solution, and we are in a good track. Thank you so much. Back to you, Atala.
Thank you very much, Professor Kone, for your concluding remarks. And thank you to all of our program participants who have shared brilliantly on what we need to develop resilience to climate change and achieve food security in West Africa. And finally, thank you to you, our audience, for joining us for today's session. I invite you to join IFPRI and Global Health 50/50 next Tuesday, October 5th at 8:00 a.m. for a special event on Global Food 50/50, inaugural report on gender, diversity, and power in the global food system, which will feature a keynote address by Agnes Kalibata, the UN Special Envoy for the 2021 Food System Summit. With that, have a great day. Until next time.